the time, we found that almost 70% of UK girls aren't able to go to the toilets during school lessons. There have been cases where children haven't been allowed to go, and then there have been medical emergencies as a result. The way to combat that is to look at schools that do currently allow children to go to the toilet during lessons. And there are so many examples of good practice across the country. Schools should be a place where a child can feel safe.
Jasneet does join us now. Jasneet, good morning. What does the research say that you've done amongst schools?
Yes, so at the moment, as we've kind of talked about, teachers do have the power to stop students from going to the toilet. So we've been looking kind of into the amount of students who have problems with accessing the toilets in schools. Our research was actually done pre-COVID, it was in 2020. But at the time, we found that almost 70% of UK girls aren't able to go to the toilets during school lessons. And we know that both full bans on students going to the toilets and common sense policies, so which is where it's up to the teacher to let students go to the toilet, have ended up with some students having medical problems within the classroom. So it could, for example, they're on their period and they've bled through their clothes, or it could be that they've had like bladder or bowel incontinence. So we work with charities such as ERIC and the British Toilet Association and propose some new rules that mean teachers have to let students go to the toilet during lessons. And hopefully some legislation will be pushed to make this the case.
OK, legislation, is that too strong, given that it's great that there's obviously a safety net for people should they need it, with the examples you mentioned, but as soon as a canny pupil knows that is there in place and they have that right, won't there be some kind of misuse of the system that's in place, and it will lessen teachers' authority?
I think that's definitely a concern that some schools have. However, I always look at Wales as an example. So in Wales, guidance is put in place, guidance put forward by their Department of Education. So they use guidance, but it's not statutory guidance, which means it's not legally binding. And within that guidance, it says that students should have access to the toilets within schools. However, we know that there are schools in Wales that have blanket bans on children going to the toilet. And we know that that has caused problems in the past, and that there have been cases where children haven't been allowed to go, and then there have been medical emergencies as a result. So I think it's one of those cases where sometimes guidance isn't working. So there needs to be some kind of regulation or statutory guidance in place for schools.
Another guest that we had on earlier, Jasneet, was making the point that this is all admirable, that people want to obviously make sure people are comfortable, and it's nonetheless reactive, and we have to get to the heart of the problem as to why, away from the children who absolutely do have reason to use the loo, there are so many wanting to escape that classroom. Something is going wrong in the way that we're teaching children.
Yes, so I think that the way to combat that is to look at schools that do currently allow children to go to the toilet during lessons. And there are so many examples of good practice across the country of where children are able to go to the toilet, and it causes minimal issues within schools. And sometimes as well, we looked at the student is constantly going to the toilet during lessons, and that can be recorded and then kind of raised with parent, and it might be other factors. So again, I think the teacher earlier talked about behavioural concerns and about kind of damage of school property in toilets and things like that. But I think that's solved by working with parents as well and kind of looping them in. And I think safeguarding, and especially kind of children going to the toilet, is a bit more than just a right. I think it's also about addressing concerns where there might be concerns. So for example, if a child is constantly going to the toilet, it might be that they, are not feeling enthused by the lesson. They might have other behavioural concerns. So I think actually it's maybe an opportunity for schools to address more deeper issues as well within their school communities.
Absolutely. And I think the teacher you were talking about was also making the point that maybe that relationship between teachers and schools and parents is a bit skewed now, and parents think they've got this absolute right to insist on their child or the child that they care for being given full rights to do what they want. But, school isn't a free-for-all. School is a place where a child needs to respect rules and regulations, and you see Facebook groups for many schools these days when parents all pile in and say, my kids should be able to do whatever they want to do, which isn't actually life, is it?
It isn't life, but I also do think that schools should be a place where a child can feel safe. And if they don't have access to the toilet, which is something that the Department of Education, even in England, recognise is important and should be the case, then I think that also raises concerns about kind of children not feeling safe at school. And if they don't feel safe, they can't learn. And I think that's a concern that's been raised kind of across experts that we've spoken to about this issue as well. So I think that's kind of the main reason as to why we think that children should be allowed to use toilets during lessons, and why a lot of people in the industry also believe so.
And finally, to a teacher listening that's thinking, oh, lordy, if that's the case, it's going to be open season. I've got no chance whatsoever of being able to teach to the degree that I reckon I'm capable of teaching to if children know they can all go and use a loo whenever. What would you say to them?
I think I'd say that if there is guidance pushed, then there will also be support for schools in place. And that's something that we are calling for as well. We've been working within the political sphere to get backing for touch legislation. I say to teachers, don't worry. We kind of remember that there are concerns that you have and there are behavioural issues sometimes, but those will be focused on within any legislation pushed.
Jasneet?
And that we're taking concerns seriously.
Jasneet Samrai, thank you for coming on.